Deep within the sweltering heart of Louisiana lies a place where the Spanish moss hangs heavy like mourning veils over ancient oak trees. St Francisville is a town that time seems to have forgotten, but the spirits here have vivid memories that refuse to fade into the past. The humid air clings to your skin and carries the scent of damp earth and decaying magnolia blossoms. In this secluded corner of the deep South stands a grand estate that is widely considered one of the most haunted locations in the United States. It is called the Myrtles Plantation, and its beautiful architecture hides a history soaked in blood and betrayal. As the sun sets behind the trees, the shadows stretch long across the veranda, and the silence is broken only by the whispers of the dead. The story of the Myrtles begins in 1796 with a man named General David Bradford, who was also known as Whiskey Dave. He was a lawyer and a fugitive who fled the United States during the Whiskey Rebellion to avoid arrest by President George Washington. Bradford arrived in the Spanish territory of West Florida and obtained a land grant of 650 acres. He built a modest home that would eventually grow into the imposing structure we see today. In those early days, the house was isolated and surrounded by deep wilderness that was home to bears and panthers. Bradford lived alone with his secrets and the heavy burden of his exile while he waited for a pardon that would allow him to bring his family to this new and strange land. Life on the frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but Bradford was a man of determination and grit. He eventually brought his wife Elizabeth and their 5 children to the plantation, which was then called Laurel Grove. The family lived in relative peace for several years, but the land itself seemed to demand a toll for their presence. The swamps surrounding the property were rife with disease, and the isolation could drive a person to madness. It was here, amidst the beauty of the indigo and cotton fields, that the first seeds of tragedy were sown. The walls of the house absorbed the anxieties and fears of its inhabitants and began to store them like a battery charging with dark energy. When General Bradford passed away, the management of the plantation fell to his daughter, Sarah Mathilda, and her husband, Clark Woodruff. Woodruff was a judge and a man of considerable influence, but he had a reputation for being stern and demanding. Under his guidance, the plantation expanded, and the house was remodeled to reflect the wealth and status of the family. However, domestic bliss was not destined to last long within these walls. Woodruff was a man of appetites, and his desires would inadvertently invite a darkness into the home that would never leave. The dynamic between the masters and the enslaved people on the plantation was complex and fraught with tension. Among the enslaved household staff was a young woman named Chloe, who is perhaps the most famous figure in the haunted history of the Myrtles. Chloe was reportedly a favorite of Clark Woodruff, and some accounts suggest she was forced into being his mistress. She was intelligent and observant, but she was also consumed by a fear that she would be sent away to work in the brutal heat of the cotton fields. To protect her position within the house, Chloe began to eavesdrop on the private conversations of the Woodruff family. She would press her ear against closed doors and listen for any news that might affect her fate or the mood of the master. One fateful afternoon, Chloe was caught in the act of spying by Clark Woodruff himself. The judge was furious at this breach of privacy and decided to make a cruel example of her. As punishment, he ordered that her left ear be cut off. This brutal act left Chloe disfigured and humiliated. To hide her injury, she began wearing a green turban around her head at all times. The turban became her trademark and a symbol of her shame and simmering resentment. Chloe continued to work in the house, but her demeanor had changed. Behind her eyes, a plan was forming that was born of desperation and a twisted desire to prove her worth to the family. Chloe devised a scheme to regain the favor of the family by nursing them back to health from a mysterious illness. She believed that if she could cure them, she would secure her place in the house forever. The occasion for her plan was the birthday celebration of the eldest Woodruff daughter. Chloe was tasked with baking the birthday cake, and she saw this as the perfect opportunity. She gathered leaves from the oleander bushes that grew in abundance around the property. Oleander is highly toxic and causes heart failure if ingested. Chloe boiled the leaves to extract the poison and mixed it into the batter of the cake. The birthday celebration was a joyous affair filled with laughter and the sweet smell of cake. Sarah Mathilda and her two daughters indulged in the treat, unaware of the deadly ingredient hidden within the flour and sugar. Chloe watched from the shadows and waited for the symptoms to begin so she could rush in with her remedies. However, she had miscalculated the dosage of the poison. Instead of a mild illness, the poison struck with lethal force. Within hours, Sarah and the children were violently ill and writhing in agony as the toxin attacked their systems. Despite the efforts of the local doctor, there was nothing that could be done to save them. Sarah Mathilda and her two daughters died a painful and terrifying death in the master bedroom. The house was plunged into mourning, and the grief of Clark Woodruff was bottomless. When the other enslaved workers discovered what Chloe had done, they were terrified that they would be blamed for the tragedy. In a panic, they dragged Chloe from her room and took her to the banks of the Mississippi River. There they dispensed their own form of justice to ensure the master knew they were not complicit. Chloe was hanged from a tree near the river, and her body was weighed down with rocks and thrown into the muddy water. Her physical life ended in violence and terror, but her spirit was unable to find rest. Since that day, The ghost of a woman wearing a green turban has been sighted countless times roaming the grounds of the Myrtles. She is often seen peering around corners or standing near the beds of sleeping guests. Photographs taken by visitors frequently show a translucent figure that matches her description. Chloe remains trapped at the scene of her crime and is eternally searching for redemption that will never come. The tragedy of the Woodruff family was only the beginning of the sorrow that would saturate the estate. Following the deaths, the mirrors in the house were covered according to the custom of the time. It was believed that covering mirrors prevented the souls of the departed from becoming trapped in the looking glass. However, in the chaos and grief following the poisoning, one mirror was allegedly overlooked. This large mirror, which hangs in the hallway to this day, is said to contain the trapped souls of Sarah and her children. Visitors report seeing faces in the glass and handprints that appear on the inside surface. The mirror has become a focal point for paranormal investigators who visit the plantation. No matter how many times the glass is cleaned or replaced, strange residue and marks return to the surface. Some claim to see the outline of a woman in a hoop skirt, while others see the small handprints of children pressing against the glass, as if trying to escape. The reflection in this mirror is not just of the physical world, but offers a glimpse into a spiritual prison. It stands as a cold testament to the sudden loss of life that shattered the family and left an indelible mark on the very furniture of the home. Years passed, and the plantation changed hands several times, but the air of tragedy remained constant. In 1834, the estate was purchased by Woodruff and Stirling, who undertook a massive renovation. He nearly doubled the size of the house and added the grand veranda with its ornamental ironwork. The name was changed to the Myrtles after the crepe myrtles that grew on the grounds. The Stirling family lived in opulence, but they too were not immune to the curse that seemed to plague the land. Of the 9 children born to the Stirlings, only 4 survived to adulthood. The cycle of death continued with the story of William Winter. Winter was a lawyer and the husband of one of the Stirling daughters. He lived at the plantation in the years following the Civil War. The South was in ruins and tensions were high as the old social order collapsed. Winter was a man who had made enemies during his career and legal dealings. One January evening in 1871, he was sitting on the side gallery of the house. He was called out to the porch by a stranger who had ridden up on horseback. The conversation was brief and heated. Without warning, a gunshot rang out through the cool evening air. The stranger had fired a load of buckshot into the chest of William Winter. As the assassin galloped away into the night, Winter staggered back into the house. He was bleeding profusely and in shock, desperate to reach his wife, who was upstairs. He began to climb the grand staircase. He clutched the banister with bloodied hands and dragged his failing body up one step at a time. His breaths were ragged, and the life was draining out of him with every heartbeat. William Winter made it to the 17th step before his strength finally gave out. He collapsed on the stairs and died in the arms of his distraught wife, who had rushed down to meet him. To this day, guests and staff report hearing the heavy plodding footsteps of a dying man ascending the stairs. The sounds always stop on the 17th step. It is a residual haunting, a replay of the final tragic moments of a man whose life was cut short by violence. The staircase remains a hotspot for cold spots and inexplicable noises. The Myrtles is said to be home to at least 12 ghosts, and each has their own sorrowful tale. Another prominent spirit is that of a French governess. She is often seen floating through the hallways, dressed in black. Little is known about her life or death, but her presence is frequently felt in the bedrooms. Guests have reported waking up to find a woman standing over them, watching with a stern expression. Others have felt the sensation of being tucked into bed by invisible hands. The maternal energy of the governess persists long after the children she cared for have turned to dust. There are also the spirits of the children who died of disease during the Stirling era. Their laughter and the sound of playing can be heard in the empty rooms. Small toys have been known to move on their own, and phantom games of hide and seek are played in the dead of night. These child spirits are not malicious, but their presence is a heartbreaking reminder of the high mortality rate of the 19th century. They are eternally young and forever bound to the house where they took their last breaths. The innocence of their giggles contrasts sharply with the dark history of murder and suicide. The atmosphere at the Myrtles changes palpably when the sun goes down. During the day, the house is a museum filled with tourists admiring the stained glass, and the plaster freezes. But at night, the energy shifts. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seem to deepen and move. The silence becomes heavy and expectant. Guests who stay in the bed and breakfast often report a feeling of being watched from the moment they enter their rooms. It is a primal sensation that raises the hair on the back of the neck and triggers the fight or flight response. One specific account from a guest involves a night in the green room. The guest awoke at 3 a.m. to a profound drop in temperature. The room was freezing, despite the summer heat outside. He lay paralyzed in bed, unable to move or call out. From the darkness of the corner, a figure emerged. It was a woman in a long dress, with her head wrapped in a cloth. She moved silently towards the bed, not walking, but gliding a few inches above the floor. The guest could see the details of her dress and the intense sorrow in her eyes. The figure stopped at the foot of the bed and leaned forward. The guest could hear the sound of shallow breathing right next to his ear, even though the entity was feet away. The smell of lavender and old decay filled the room. He closed his eyes and prayed for the vision to vanish. When he opened them again, the room was empty, but the indentation of a person sitting on the edge of the mattress remained. He did not sleep for the rest of the night and left the plantation as soon as the sun rose. Skeptics often dismiss these stories as the product of overactive imaginations or the power of suggestion. They argue that old houses make noises as they settle, and that the mind plays tricks in the dark. However, the sheer volume of consistent reports from people who have never met one another suggests something more is at play. Police officers, security guards, and skeptics alike have all experienced phenomena they cannot explain at the Myrtles. The plantation has been studied by paranormal experts for decades, and it remains a puzzle that defies logical explanation. Another chilling phenomenon is the piano that plays by itself. In the entryway stands a grand piano that has been part of the house for generations. Staff members have reported hearing the distinct chords of a sad melody drifting from the room when no one is there. When they enter to investigate, the music stops abruptly. On rare occasions, the keys have been seen depressing, as if struck by invisible fingers. It is as if the residents of the past are trying to cling to the comforts and joys they knew in life. The grounds themselves are just as active as the main house. The ghost of a Native American woman has been spotted walking near the gazebo. Legend says that the plantation was built over an ancient tunica, Indian burial ground. If this is true, it would explain the intensity of the hauntings. Disturbing a resting place creates a spiritual unrest that can plague a location for centuries. The land remembers the disrespect, and the spirits of the indigenous people may be mingling with the ghosts of the colonial settlers. Voodoo and hoodoo practices were common among the enslaved population of Louisiana, and some believe that hexes were placed on the owners of the plantation. The cruel treatment of workers and the arrogant dismissal of their humanity could have invited curses. A voodoo charm or gris-gris bag hidden within the walls could act as a beacon for negative entities. This spiritual warfare adds another layer of complexity to the haunting. The Myrtles is not just a house of tragedy, but a battlefield of spiritual forces. One of the most disturbing reports involves the appearance of a young girl who chants a rhythmic rhyme. Guests staying in the children's room have heard a soft voice reciting a nursery rhyme that fades in and out. The girl has been seen reflecting in the window panes during thunderstorms. She appears to be looking for someone or waiting for a game to resume. Her presence is melancholic and evokes a deep sense of pity in those who witness it. She is a lost soul, separated from her family by the veil of death. The current owners of the Myrtles embrace the haunted reputation, but they also respect the history. They understand that they are caretakers of a legacy that involves real human suffering. The tour they offer tell the stories of the people who lived and died there. They do not need to manufacture scares, because the reality of the plantation is frightening enough. The house demands respect, and those who mock the spirits often find themselves the target of paranormal activity. There is a particular room known as the Room of the Painted Lady. It is named for a mysterious female spirit who appeared to a painter working on the house. He captured her likeness on a canvas that now hangs in the room. Guests sleeping there report the sensation of a hand stroking their forehead or cheek. It is a gentle touch, but in the context of a haunted house, it is terrifying. The Painted Lady seems to be a benevolent spirit, perhaps, trying to offer comfort to the living. The supernatural activity at the Myrtles is not limited to visual apparitions. Olfactory hauntings are common. The scent of French perfume cigar smoke and cooking food often wafts through the halls when no source is present. These phantom smells are strong and distinct. They transport visitors back in time and create an immersive experience that is hard to shake. It is as if the past is bleeding through into the present, overlapping in a confusing sensory collage. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVP recordings captured at the plantation, have revealed chilling messages. Investigators have recorded voices saying, "Get out and help me." These disembodied voices suggest that some of the spirits are not happy with their confinement. They are aware of the living and are trying to communicate their distress. The audio evidence adds a scientific layer to the anecdotal claims and makes it harder to dismiss the stories as mere folklore. The Myrtles Plantation stands as a monument to the complexities of the American South. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and horrific history. The white columns and manicured gardens conceal the scars of slavery, disease, and murder. The ghosts that walk these halls are the keepers of the truth. They ensure that the stories of the past are not sanitized or forgotten. They force us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and the consequences of our actions. As you leave the grounds of the Myrtles and drive back onto the main road, the feeling of unease lingers. You find yourself checking the rearview mirror half, expecting to see a woman in a green turban standing in the road. The silence of the car feels oppressive after the whispering atmosphere of the house. You realize that the true horror of the plantation is not just the ghosts, but the realization of how fragile life is. The line between the living and the dead is thinner than we like to imagine. The trapped souls of this southern estate are bound to the land by trauma and unfinished business. They are caught in a loop, repeating their final moments, or searching for a resolution that is impossible to find. Chloe still waits by the door. William Winter still climbs the stairs. The children still play in the nursery. The house holds them all in its wooden embrace, refusing to let go. It is a purgatory of cypress and brick. If you are brave enough to visit the Myrtles be prepared for an experience that will challenge your understanding of reality. Walk softly through the halls and listen closely to the silence. You may find that the house is listening back. The Myrtles Plantation is not just a building. It is a living, breathing entity composed of the memories of the dead. And once you have stepped inside, a part of you may never truly leave. The sun sets once more over St Francisville, casting the plantation into darkness. The crickets begin their nightly chorus, and the mist rises from the ground. Inside the house, the air grows cold, and the floorboards creak without the weight of the living. The stage is set for another night of restless wandering. The Myrtles waits, standing sentinel in the shadows, guarding its secrets and its souls until the end of time.